Today I want to talk to you all about organising your play and your playmat and your experience within Commander. Obviously, we play a lot of cards in Commander, we ramp quite heavily in the early game, we get a lot of permanents off the battlefield, things can get quite messy. And recently I was at Command Fest and I saw some very intense board states, let's say. So yeah, here's some tips to hopefully help you out and yeah, keep your board state nice and organised so you miss less triggers, you're more aware of what's going on, and when somebody asks you a question, you can easily point to all your permanents and show them. Let's do this. So here we have my playmat, and I'm going to show you my setup as we unfold with a few things. So I've got my hand, I tend to, once I've dealt out the cup, I drop that in the middle of the table, and then I'll wait for everybody else to get ready. Awesome stuff. Deck, top left, commander, top left. Underneath my commander are my tokens that are relevant to that commander. So any specific tokens that I've got that are special to the deck. I also have dice set off to the side. My life total I tend to place on top of my commander, and then any extra tokens that I need, they all go on the side as well. So, first off, lands. Let's get some lands on the battlefield. Now, I may be a bit, I guess, pedantic about the way I place things, but here's how I do my lands. So lands that tap for any colour, I put on the far left. Then I tend to put my basics in colour order depending on my commander, or what colour my commander is. In this instance, it's Bant, so green, white and blue. After that, we've got multicoloured lands. So Simic Growth Chamber and a Sungrass Prairie there. And then colourless lands go on the far right. Yeah, so this is how I display my lands, and I always tend to separate them out into piles like that. I don't clump them up and put them all on top of each other, because then you're trying to hold your cards in hand, then you're like, oh, can I cast that? And you're like cycling through, how many have I got of this? Like, it gets messy, you're more likely to miscount how many forests, plains and islands you've got so you can cast your relevant stuff. So I try to make things as simple as possible, and this way when I easily look down at my board state, I can say, oh, I've actually got two sources of green plus the ones that are double here. So I can use my colourless to turn into coloured mana. Yeah? Moving on from my lands, let's get some creatures on the battlefield. So creatures and spells and anything that I cast permanent-wise on the battlefield, I always present to the front of my board. Yeah? So I'll say I'm playing a flump, and I'll put it to the front, and then I'll go to the front of the board. If these are my first creatures that I'm playing, then they will both go to the front equal and centre. If I played Flump on turn 1 and then I cast Alandra on turn 2, I would place them one at the front and one at the back. These creatures are no longer summoning sick, these creatures are summoning sick. Yeah, that's just how I track it. I know what can attack and what can't attack. Yeah, obviously as your board states get bigger and bigger, it becomes harder and harder to do this. This is why it's so important to stay organised. You can start to obviously layer things up, and then you can see the first name of each creature to give yourself more room. So yeah, so in the instance of Alandra, if I created a token, yeah, I would put the tokens at the back because they just entered, they were summoning sick. And then another thing with tokens, what I like to do is D20s is how many of the tokens I have, and then any D6s are the ++1s or any type of buffs that those things are getting. I only represent physical buffs as encounters. If I have a lord that gives all creatures +1/+1, I don't represent that with the dice because it gets too hard to track as things change and people cast removal spells and things like that. So yeah, D20s I use as the amount, and that's the counters for the +1/+1s. Yeah, not summoning sick, summoning sick. Awesome stuff. That's how I do creatures. Moving on from creatures, let's get some more permanents on the battlefield. Let's start with some mana rocks. So yeah, like I said, when I first cast Soul Ring or a Mind Stone, whatever it may be, I will put it to the front of the board, and then once I've cast that and it's on the front of the board, everyone can see that it's there. Normally, because these come down early on the play, I will put them to the front, and then once it's past a turn, I tend to move them down to the bottom right. Yeah, I try not to mix my lands with my mana rocks, just because I don't want any confusion. Like, say for instance, you're saying, oh, I'll tap 2 and a blue. Yeah. Try not to do that, I sometimes do, because this then puts us in situations where, say, someone exiles all artifacts, you can sometimes miss them. So I try to keep them all separate. So yeah, I tend to end up with colourless mana over here, but obviously sometimes you do have like your Arcane Signet, stuff like that, that does tap for coloured mana. So yeah, presented when cast, and then moved to the bottom right for my artifacts. Regarding non-mana rock based artifacts, they get presented once again to the front, and then they will move to the right. Yeah, tend to have those top right out the way, and then following on from those, we have our enchantments, which I tend to play just below them, and I do tend to stack them quite similarly. So make sure I can see the name of the card, and if I need to read, I can just flip one over and read what I need to do. Yeah? Now, as we can see with the Fisher's Talent, we have an upkeep trigger. Everyone knows this one. Simple dice on top of your deck. So when you get to your turn, untap upkeep, go to draw. There's a dice there. Okay, I've got a trigger. Where is it? And this is the point of why having an organized board state really, really helps, because you can easily go, where is my triggers? These are my creatures. These are my artifacts. These are my enchantments. Yeah? You can look around your opponents straight away, nice and easy, so you know exactly what you're doing. One more thing regarding triggers is the triggers that happen on your opponent's upkeep, I tend to put those cards on top. Yeah, so I can clearly see them, they're on the battlefield. If I miss them, it's then my fault. There's a dice over here for upkeeps, and then the opponent's upkeep cards tend to be the ones that I place on top. Yeah, I want to make sure that when everyone's going through their steps and their phases, that I'm aware of everything, and at a quick glance down the table I can go during each opponent's upkeep, okay, boom, and then it goes round and moves on. Yeah, you don't normally miss that, say the first 2 or 3 times it goes off. It's when that gets to turn 4 or turn 5 of that happening, when it's become stagnated and everybody's focusing on different things and the board state develops and then maybe a bigger threat, that's when you start to miss triggers like this and miss your upkeep triggers. Yeah, just really important, just before you end your turn, just take 2 seconds is all it takes just to go, right, everything's all in place. Yeah, any upkeeps on opponent's turn, put those cards on top, boom, sorted. Okay, right, discard down the hand side, pass the turn. Yeah, and if you do that every time, you'll end up in a situation where you're aware more of what your stuff does, so when something your opponent casts or your opponent plays has an effect, you can go, right, okay, this is going to trigger this, or this is going to trigger this, you know, and you can start to respond, and it'll give you much more of a situational awareness of what's happening on everybody's battlefield without having to scrutinize and stare so intently at what everybody else is doing. Right, now there's a few more things that I like to do sometimes during gameplay. I know I said I don't like to stack cards too much on top of each other, but when I'm in a situation something like this, when I've got a Soul Ring and I've got Mikokoroko, Center of the Seas, this is 2 mana, each player draws a card. Yeah, so I can pay 2 mana with a Soul Ring, tap the Mikokoro, and I can make 2 players each draw a card. Sometimes, because they're both colourless mana, I will stack them next to each other or on top of each other. Yeah. If I know that I am getting to the end of the player before me's turn, and I want to crack my Mind Stone, I might, during my opponent's turns, move things around and be like, okay, right, okay, get that on top there because maybe all this is tapped out, something like that. And it's like, right, I can put those together. I can be right, I'm going to tap that for 1, and I'm going to crack this Mind Stone, boom, sorted, goes in the graveyard. Now, graveyards, okay? So this is how I do my graveyard. Boom, that's all in my graveyard, yeah? Something gets exiled from graveyard, I turn it sideways and I put it underneath my graveyard. So exile zone is underneath my graveyard. Yeah, my graveyard is still face up. If we then get to a point of doing special graveyard zones from like Deathy Boardwalkers, stuff like that, you know, we can put them to the side. I tend to put them on a bit of an angle and drop a counter on it. Then I'm aware, okay, this is something special, this is something unique. If this is something that somebody else is casting from, I tend to put it towards the front of my board. Yeah, so they're aware. If I'm on the far left of a pod and I've got 3 other people on these sides, then obviously, if it's like, is it Fountain of Knowledge where everybody casts from, stuff like that, it goes over the top right in the middle of the board so everybody can see and everybody's got access. But for the most part, like graveyard shenanigans that people are casting from, or something that's been exiled in a different place is put over here out the way, and then shared stuff tends to be in the middle of the table. So there we have it, guys. That's how I stay organised when playing Commander. I'm not saying you need to follow exactly what I'm doing. Find a way that works for you. You might want your deck on the left or your right. You know, some people have it at the bottom of the playmat. Whatever works for you, whatever makes you feel comfortable. And if you do that every game, you're going to miss less triggers. You're going to be more aware of what's happening on the battlefield, your opponent's battlefield, your battlefield. You know, it's just going to really help those games, make the games go a lot smoother, a lot easier, like I've mentioned. So yeah, stay organised, and you'll be better players for it. Oh, wait 1 second. I got a little bonus tip for you. This is more of a deck building thing that I do. But you see here, I have all my cards, but I also have a bunch of cards that have all got markers on them. What are these markers for? These markers are just little bits of paper that I cut up, yeah, and I use them when I find a card in my deck that's underperforming or that I'm probably going to cut at some point to replace with something else. So as you can see in this deck, I've got Tempest Bunny, Teacher on Archive, I've got an Ancient, No Witnesses, Secret Rendezvous, Faber Elder, and Dream Crawler. The Dream Crawler, sorry, I should say, they're all marked for cut this card if you find something better. So I know that whenever I get a card and I go, oh, okay, yeah, that card looks really neat, I want to slide that into this deck, I can pick my deck up, look through, and look for anything that's got a marker on it. I can pull them all out and go, right, okay, which does this say new card best to replace? Looking at things like the CMC, the colour of the permanent, instant, sorcery, artifact, enchantment, all that type of stuff, and the effect it has on it to see which is the best cut to slide that new one in. That's just how I stay organised with deck building and upgrading cards within my decks. So yeah, anyway, if you made it this far in the video, please consider dropping a comment down below, hitting that thumbs up. The magic subscribe button would really help me out right now. And yeah, I'll see you on the next video. Goodbye for now.